This video was brought to you by Squarespace. I have one single question to ask you. Do you need a website? If the answer is yes, then I have a lot more than one piece of follow-up information. Squarespace makes building just about any website super easy. You can build a blog or a storefront or a digital portfolio, it doesn't matter. No coding, no prior knowledge, no problem. Squarespace's intuitive builder makes adding and formatting text and images and videos intuitive. You can even start with a template if you want. And by the end, you will have a slick, professional site that meets all your needs. And if you do need a bit of extra juice, Squarespace offers a bunch of powerful extensions. My site, Arlo Recommends, is a simple blog, so I just cook up my posts, schedule them to publish and push to social media automatically, and I'm done. Which leaves me lots of extra time to obsess over analytics. I'm a YouTuber, it's what we do. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now for today's recommendation, butter knives. They're really useful. Okay, sorry, I didn't have time to come up with anything today. Thanks again to Squarespace. Now, I only have one single video to start and, that's basically encrypted. Hello, my name is Arlo, and I am very, very excited for the Nintendo Switch 2. And that's because the first Switch, it's just so darn amazing, isn't it? Right now, we're on the tail end of the best Nintendo generation of all time, if you ask me. I just feel like the Switch, it stands head and shoulders above its predecessors in most categories. But as much as I love the little thing, it certainly ain't perfect. Among the new functionality and the great library and all that, we have seen some surprising blunders. Surprising because most of these are areas where Nintendo has historically been pretty strong. So going into the next generation, there's probably a lot that Nintendo could improve, but there are 5 things in particular that I would like to see done better on Switch 2. For starters, yeah, let's jump right into this with an obvious one. The Switch eShop is abysmal. It is simply dreadful. It downright stinks. It's browser-based, so even from day one, it never felt good. It's always been a little sluggish, but it's only gotten worse over the last 8 years. I don't know how any of this works. I don't know why this would be the case, but it seems like the more games that have been added to the shop, the slower it's gotten. It's like a room that you're filling with stuff and you can't move around anymore. Now it's like wading through sludge. Titles take way too much time to load. Everything freezes and lags. The most basic navigation has become an unpleasant chore. And that's to say nothing of the lack of features. Here in the year 2025, it feels very strange having to purchase a bunch of games individually because there isn't even a basic cart feature. Organization is also quite poor, making it harder for games that aren't already successful to rise to the top. And then, of course, there's the shovelware. Low-quality games have always had a place on any platform, and Nintendo's love of unusual hardware features has encouraged a particular breed of junk on their consoles pretty much since the Wii generation. But the Switch eShop takes things to the next level and beyond. Zero-effort asset flips have been a problem since the early days, flooding the platform and making it more and more annoying to find actual, real new games. But now, the rise of generative AI has turned the store into a veritable landfill. Literally worthless games, chock full of hideous AI art, falsely advertised using other hideous AI art, is now the most prolific genre in gaming, when you think about it. And of course, loads of these games are shameless, copyright-violating ripoffs, existing for the sole purpose of tricking lesser experienced shoppers. Nintendo used to be quite strict about what they allowed on their storefronts, probably like too strict. And I don't know what happened, but this generation, they just kind of threw up their hands and opened the floodgates for one and all. And I just don't understand it. Like, can we get a happy medium here? You don't need to micromanage every game. You don't have to be super duper strict about what's allowed. We just need like one single person to glance at the incoming games to filter out the obvious trash, the games that are of literally no value to anyone, that are basically just scams. Having an open platform where anyone can publish just about anything is cool from an artistic perspective, I guess. Maybe you could argue that the line between predatory and simply amateurish may not always be easy to see, but so many of these games do nothing but hurt customers and damage Nintendo's reputation. Like, how can there be literally no moderation whatsoever? I don't understand it. Heck, I'll do it for free. I will do it for free. Like, just send me a list of all the new games coming in on any given day. It will take me 30 seconds to filter out the junk. We don't want that old, heavy-handed Nintendo moderation. Just a light touch. A feather-light finger would do. So yeah, I have no idea how Nintendo is gonna handle the eShop on Switch 2. If it's fully backwards compatible, I don't know what's gonna happen to all these games. Does the whole shop just move on over? Will Nintendo consider changing up their moderation process with this new platform? However they need to do it, the next eShop needs to be better. Every time I hop on the store on my Series X or my PS5, I am floored by how much smoother the experience is. Like it's genuinely shocking. It's like swimming through clear water after flopping through waist-deep mud. I get it, the Switch doesn't have a lot of juice, so the UI is super simple, yada yada, but I don't know, please, Nintendo, it should not be so unpleasant to purchase video games on your massively popular video game hardware. And, you know, some nice music wouldn't hurt either, just saying. Next up, here's something that I think a lot of my viewers will probably agree with. You know what should be better on Switch 2? What on earth has happened to Mario sports games? I'll admit this is an area where I don't have much of a personal stake. I've never been big on Mario sports, so I don't know all the ins and outs of what the old games had that the new ones don't, but I can certainly see the broadest issues. To sum it all up, it seems that the older games tended to be rich in both personality and content. On the personality side, both the characters and the artists bringing them to life were better able to express themselves. Mario Strikers, in particular, had the characters emoting with unusual intensity. The further back you go, the more loose Nintendo was with how their characters were depicted. The GameCube era, man, back then, it felt like anything went. But over time, Nintendo kind of homogenized Mario and all his friends, opting for a pretty basic, easily recognizable style without much in the way of expression. It's certainly okay for Mario to look more or less like basic Mario in these sports games, but that doesn't mean that the games should be quite so lacking in personality. And then the content. I have heard tales, epic tales, of the huge variety of modes these games used to offer. Loads of single-player stuff, even meaty campaigns. As someone who doesn't spend a lot of time playing games with friends, this right here is what I am looking for in my Mario sports games. I'm not really interested in simply playing match after match after match with other people. I want content. I want stuff to work toward. I want game to play. But at some point, Nintendo decided that they just weren't particularly interested in providing varied sports-related content anymore, and they started releasing their games with a pretty shocking lack of stuff to do. To be fair, this is an ongoing problem that's not unique to the Switch, and this generation we have seen Nintendo improve in some areas. There have been some wins here and there, but Switch's Mario sports games have been all over the place. It's as though they're always on the cusp of bringing Mario sports back to the glory days, but can't quite stick the landing. Mario Tennis Aces promised the return of campaign mode, and the trailers, they showed off some really cool cutscenes. But then the campaign ended up being incredibly short and basic, and never more interesting than just that one opening cutscene. Like, that was the peak. And the rest of the game barely offered any content at all. The gameplay? It was terrific. It was really great. But beyond playing online, which of course required contending with constant connection issues, there just wasn't anything to do. Then you got Mario Strikers Battle League. This should have been a momentous occasion. After so many years of vanilla Mario, here was the return of the sports series with the highest concentration of personality. And judging by the trailers, it seemed like it was everything we could want. And then it released. It turned out that Nintendo forgot to put any content in it at all. Just a bog standard single player cup mode, online play, and that That's it. That was it. And I don't know the details, but I've also heard that gameplay changes were generally not well received. I wonder if we could consider Battle League Mario Sports' biggest missed opportunity ever, considering just how many years fans spent praying for a new title. And then there's Mario Golf Super Rush. From where I'm standing, this game probably got the most right. The campaign was at least more substantial than the one in Tennis Aces, and I had a good amount of fun with it. And there were a decent number of modes to enjoy, especially if you're into multiplayer and all that. Stylistically, though, the game was easily the most boring out of all the Switch sports titles. Way too often, it really just looked like a bunch of Mario-related characters and stuff scattered across these bland, real-life golf courses. It could have used a lot more personality, that's for sure. All three of these games were given some free updates after launch, but this wasn't the gift that Nintendo seemed to think it was. On paper, yeah, it's nice when a game is supported by its developer. DLC is a good thing. But in every case, it felt like Nintendo was just holding stuff back so they could drip feed it to us later. And it wasn't even really content. It was just characters and little tiny stuff that felt like it should have been there from launch. Nothing actually substantial. And releasing a game that feels very bare bones, then adding things over the course of several months, and ending up with a game that still more or less feels equally bare bones. Yeah, that's not fun. That's not what supporting a game means. It's frustrating because it's starting to feel that this might all be purposeful, you know? Like, each Mario sports game has so much potential. The gameplay is usually incredibly good, and in this day and age, competitive multiplayer games, they're bigger than ever, kind of goes without saying. I could easily see a really good Mario sports game being played competitively, you know, like enjoyed by streamers and their audiences everywhere. But Nintendo seems uninterested in fostering that kind of experience. When you release a multiplayer game with essentially no content, just online play, that's basically what you're doing. You're putting all of your eggs in the online multiplayer basket. But you actually have to do it. You have to put in the work. That kind of care and attention to detail and, you know, actual support does take a lot of work, I'm sure. And they just don't seem to be interested. They seem to be more interested in just getting the game out there, making their money, and moving on to something else. You know, Mario Party, it's in the same boat. Those games are perfect for DLC. Nintendo could just keep adding content and encouraging people to keep playing for years. But there's no need. Party games and sports games alike are meant to just keep coming and coming in an endless carousel. No single title is meant to be the best one. Just the newest one. It feels like they're literally trying to make games that are just good enough. You know, you'll be just satisfied enough to stick with the series, but not so satisfied that you'll only stick with the one game. It's this unhappy medium where the only option for fans is to just keep buying and saying, it's better than nothing. Perhaps this is a conspiracy theory, but it sure feels true. And in any case, it's just weird that there are decades-old games that outclass their modern iterations in nearly every way. I mean, we're living in the future here. I was a kid back then, and now I'm a grown-up. Isn't this stuff supposed to get better? I kinda get it when a series will probably get a new entry at least once per generation until the end of the universe. How can you just improve and improve forever? I don't know, but I would like Mario sports games on Switch 2 to at least try a little harder than this. Like, really, we need content. At least some basic stuff for lone players like me to mess around with. Unlockables, campaigns, challenge modes, achievements, just stuff. Even if the newest sports game isn't hailed as a new series best, wouldn't it at least be nice if a humongous percentage of players didn't walk away disappointed and regretting their purchase? Nintendo wants us to think that they're in the business of making smiles. But if a longtime series fan feels not just disappointed with a new game, but downright cheated, then Nintendo has failed dramatically at that job. The entire Switch generation saw the company growing in a lot of ways and getting a whole bunch of stuff right. So here's hoping its Mario sports games were simply caught up in all the crazy change and will be consistently satisfying next time around. Okay, so the Switch had one problem that was rather uncharacteristic of Nintendo. Next gen, you know what I personally could do without. Insert joke about the global economic climate making it difficult to source Nintendium. Nintendo has a long history of selling unusually reliable hardware, heavily used handhelds that somehow still function perfectly to this day, GameCubes that are dropped from space or whatever, the usual stories about Game Boys surviving atomic blasts and supernovas. I personally still have all of my old systems, and they are all in great condition. I've experienced pretty much zero malfunctions or breaks throughout 3 decades of Nintendo fandom. And I think many other fans can probably say the same or close to it, which makes the Switch such a strange anomaly. I mean, a broken Nintendo system? It's basically an urban legend. It's a cryptid. It is perhaps normal for any new hardware to go through some growing pains at launch. You know, sometimes you can't spot a point of potential failure until you get your systems into the hands of a few million testers, and the manufacturing process has got to be tweaked and updated a few times. But early Switch adopters saw a surprisingly high rate of issues. It's true that bricked or otherwise malfunctioning systems and dock-scratched screens and heat warping and all that weren't by any means common, and a problem can feel a lot bigger than it actually is when every instance is compiled into a YouTube video, but it still seemed like more people were having problems than they had for the launch of any other Nintendo system. And even if those problems were more or less smoothed out, there was clearly something very wrong with the way the Joy-Cons were designed. I can only imagine Nintendo gradually updated the things throughout the generation because the problem seems to have slowly faded, but I, for one, found it to be a constant problem for most of the Switch's life. And it's not hard to find other people with similar experiences. Even if you take good care of your Joy-Cons, drift can set in fast and render a control stick completely unusable. Nintendo offered free repairs in some territories, but really did not do a good job of addressing the issue. It was a real thorn in the Switch's side, and of course the sides of many customers. The original model of the Switch just seems a lot more shoddy than we're used to. The design is cool, and elements certainly seemed very modern at first, but even from the beginning, there was this slight cheapness to the thing. And I do think this is more or less because Nintendo had to kind of rush it out the gate. The Wii U tanked so hard that they needed to replace it and reinvent their whole business strategy as quickly as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if they just didn't have as much time for R&D and stress testing as usual. The good news is that if that's true, then we probably don't have much to worry about. The Switch generation was nice and long, the longest ever for Nintendo. They've had ample time to design the next iteration of Switch, especially considering we have reason to believe it was originally going to launch last year. And the Switch was a totally new idea. This will be an upgrade, so I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo had less straight-up inventing to do and more simple tweaking. I'm trying not to get my hopes up or anything, but it sure would be nice if we just didn't have to worry about all this stuff next gen, wouldn't it? I mean, hey, this has certainly increased my appreciation of Nintendo's tendency to produce pretty reliable hardware, so now let's just get back to normal and be that much more thankful. Okay, so everyone can agree that hardware problems stink, but this next one might be a little more divisive. One thing has really bugged me about the Switch generation. It's the music. This is another area where Nintendo has historically excelled. I mean, do I even need to remind you of their long history of producing some of the best video game music there ever was? Their ability to almost casually throw out tunes so immediately iconic that they become permanent fixtures in the VGM scene? The Mario series alone has produced an unfathomable amount of phenomenal music. So I really don't know what changed during the Switch generation. Breath of the Wild came out right at the beginning, and the music was really good, but also more subtle and minimalistic and all that, so not really as memorable. But it seemed like an outlier, an exception. But then Mario Odyssey came out, and the music was good, but not quite 3D World good or Galaxy good. And I thought, okay, surely the next major first-party game would have amazing music. Yet game after game after game hit the scene with soundtracks that tended to be pretty good, at best. Music that certainly worked, it was all pleasant enough, but very little that jumped out at me and stuck in my memory. Very little that I wanted to seek out and listen to on my own. Very little of those tunes that just like adhere to your very soul and elicit incredible nostalgia when you hear the opening notes, you know? I mean, if anything, Odyssey ended up having some of the best music all gen. The single best example of disappointing music, for me at least, has got to be Metroid Dread. Some of my all-time favorite VGM tracks come from Metroid games, let's make that clear. I can basically just put on the OSTs from the Metroid Prime trilogy and listen to them like albums. Like seriously, just for hours and hours on end. But Dread's music is infinitely forgettable. I've played through the game probably a dozen times by now, and I can't even say it's grown on me. It is still the most fine Metroid music I could imagine. Not bad by any means, but certainly not great. Actually, no. Now that I'm saying that, I'm remembering some of the music is bad. The cutscene music, some of the music in the cutscenes is genuinely terrible. It sounds like N64 music. Anyway, then my most recent disappointment was Echoes of Wisdom. A brand new 2D Zelda was a chance to finally move away from all that beautiful subtlety and get our ears on something more energetic and memorable. But that game's music is also just pretty good, if you ask me. It apes the styles and sounds from past games, but doesn't manage to do much with them. And man, to bring up Mario Sports again, some of those old games have the best music. So many incredibly fun tunes in all sorts of genres. But all the modern OSTs are made up of a bunch of generic sports channel music. It's like the Mario part was left behind somewhere along the way. I won't just sit here listing examples, you get the picture. It just feels like essentially no series is at its musical best on Switch. Too little of this newer music lives up to the Nintendo legacy, you know? It is possible that I'm being unfair and hearing the old tunes through, rose-tinted headphones? Like, maybe it's nostalgia convincing me that the older music was better. I'm trying to be open to that idea, but I don't know. Switch generation is long. I've had many years to try and let some of these soundtracks grow on me, and it just ain't happening. And I often discover older games and instantly marvel at how great they sound. It really just feels like something was off in the music department during the Switch generation, which really, I don't understand at all. It's not like there's one person managing every single soundtrack. It's not like there's been some executive order to make the music in every game a little less good. I don't know why this would be such a widespread issue. I don't know, I guess it is certainly possible that we've got different people working on these soundtracks now. Maybe a lot of the old guard has moved on. Or it's also possible that somehow this is just a coincidence? It doesn't seem likely, yet I don't really have a more likely alternative, so who knows? Whatever the case though, I just have to hope that somehow things improve on Switch 2. I don't know why they would. If music was consistently disappointing this gen, I can't imagine things will suddenly correct themselves simply because these games are now being made for new hardware. But I guess I've got to at least hope. The Switch gave me a brand new Pikmin game, and it was so good. Almost a perfect Pikmin game. Almost. And finally, we come to the last Switch 1 blunder I would like Switch 2 to avoid. This isn't the kind of thing that bothers everyone, but to me, it's a pretty big issue. Boy, it sure would be nice if games ran better next gen, wouldn't it? This is yet another area where Nintendo has pretty much always excelled. Once again, I doubt I even need to remind you of how their first-party efforts tend to be the best-looking and running games on their respective systems. Nintendo devs know how to wring every last drop out of a piece of hardware and optimize a game so perfectly that you'd be forgiven for assuming said hardware was a lot more powerful than it is. The classic example is Super Mario Galaxy, which, apart from rendering at a slightly lower resolution, looked nearly as good as an Xbox 360 game. Nintendo games have always offered performance at least as good as anyone could reasonably expect, which makes the Switch generation all the more surprising. There have been a few good examples of Nintendo at their best. Breath of the Wild doesn't run perfectly, but I think the scope of the game kind of makes up for it. And then of course, Tears of the Kingdom is something of a technical marvel. Splatoon 3 is a really great example of a game that looks phenomenal and still manages to deliver a smooth frame rate. Metroid Prime Remastered, there's another game that just looks impossibly good. And at the time of this recording, we still haven't seen the full reveal for Prime 4, but even the first teaser managed to wow me. There are Switch games that are well optimized and deliver the kinds of experiences you might expect from the hardware, but way too many games underdeliver. And there's such a wide range, too. You got Mario and Luigi Brothership, which artistically is pleasant, but not particularly impressive, yet still sports a disappointingly fuzzy resolution and a slightly choppy 30 FPS. Of course, on the extreme end of the spectrum, you've got Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which run so poorly, I am still surprised that Nintendo allowed them to be released in that state and never did a thing to improve them. Like, just look at this. Like, all of this. What is this? And to bring this game up again, more recently they gave us Echoes of Wisdom, which feels microscopic in scope compared to Zelda's modern 3D titles, yet somehow runs substantially worse, with a constantly fluctuating frame rate. Third-party games from devs without as much Switch-specific technical know-how, I get it. Especially in the case of multiplats that had to be scaled down considerably. That's a whole conversation in itself, and you could argue that the Switch turned out much poorer ports than Nintendo systems usually get. But the first parties, I just find it so strange that they've been so inconsistent. We've seen the most surprising titles struggle in the weirdest ways. And after so many years of Nintendo games running so well, it's been weird. Just weird. Some of these games are so far below Nintendo's usual quality standard, I can say that at least on some level, it has damaged my opinion of them, honestly. They've always been a profit-first company, obviously, but this was one area where we used to be able to expect more from them. In the case of Pokemon especially, it has been definitively proven that performance essentially matters none. If people want the game, they're gonna buy it anyway. So there's really no incentive to spend the extra money to polish up a game if you don't have to. And Nintendo exploiting that fact, like actively exploiting that fact, is really disappointing to see. However, even if it's certainly possible that the company will continue to underdeliver in the performance department, particularly when it comes to Pokemon, I'm trying to stay hopeful. I know next to nothing about hardware, but I'm hoping that all this was simply down to the Switch's unique architecture or something. Again, it was kind of rushed out the door, and it ran on mobile tech that was showing its age even back in 2017. I have to wonder if many of these issues were caused by higher than usual optimization needs. The Switch was tasked with delivering console-level experiences on a tiny little handheld, and the kinds of games devs wanted to make were perhaps at odds with the very idea of the Switch. It's like they didn't want to compromise the scope of their games, so they just kind of made what they wanted to make and spent as much time optimizing as the budget would allow and called it a day? Basically, I'm hoping these problems will more or less be unique to Switch, and that Switch 2 will offer devs enough juice that they don't need to worry quite as much about achieving clear images and stable frame rates. Most Nintendo games are naturally light on realism and big on style, so I could see them utilizing the new hardware to make great-looking games and still having juice to spare to ensure they run well. That's the dream, at least. Like hardware issues, performance issues were a problem during the Switch generation, and I can only hope that they more or less disappear with the arrival of a much more refined and carefully planned system. If it's weaker than the competition, which, obviously it will be, then poorly done multiplats will always be a part of the discussion, but first parties at least should have everything to gain here. Buying the latest game from a beloved Nintendo series and contending with baffling performance issues has been a very new and very unexpected experience for me. And now that I've done it, I can officially say, not a fan. Tried it, didn't like it, so let's just go back to normal now. And hopefully a few years from now, we'll all be marveling at how the latest 3D Mario looks like a PlayStation 6 Pro game? That's the face I'm gonna make in the thumbnail. Well, those are the 5 things that I would personally like to see improved on Switch 2. Despite my profuse objections, I get the feeling you're going to tell us what areas you would like to see Nintendo work on next gen. And you know what? I suppose I can't stop you. And while you're down there in the comments, please let me know what about Arlo Nintendo content you would like to see improved next gen. Perhaps, more memes? Yes, yeah. Surely you would like to see more memes. Sparky, put whatever the meme is right now, put it. Put the meme. Put the best meme. Yes, next gen is up to a great start.